to the plot, we know there's a lot of lore-breaking stuff. I don't know the extent of it because I'm not a scholar of Tolkien by any means. I've read the trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, which is not a trilogy of books, but I just like to call it the trilogy so people know. I've read The Hobbit, and I've read bits and pieces from other works. I have Silmarillion on my bookshelf, and I've got a few of the other ones. I even have his King Arthur and Beowulf. So it's not like I don't know Tolkien's writing, but I know some of this stuff is not Tolkien.
Yeah.
That being said, I think there is an enjoyable fantasy story here.
Yes, there is. And I think we're gonna have to accept that this is an adaptation. It's not lore, and it's essentially it's gonna be Amazon's version.
Yes.
It's sort of fan fiction-y, but it's a little more than fan fiction because but it is separate from the books. It's gonna be completely separate. This is a separate canon. So
that's right. It's almost like not an introduction to Lord of the Rings, but it's like a here's an easier to digest story set in what is essentially Middle Earth, but is still sort of different, and it just allows people to get into the world without being bogged down by the nitty-gritty details that of the Tolkien lore.
Right, and it helps me actually because I'm just give me some visuals of who people are.
Mm-hmm.
Like now I've seen Gil-galad, I can look up what he did.
That's right. Yeah. So for people like us, now we might be a rare breed, but for people like us, this does not hurt my enjoyment. I was worried that it might, but it does not hurt my enjoyment of Peter Jackson's trilogies. It doesn't hurt my enjoyment of the books. I just take this for what it is. It is a fun fantasy story set in Amazon's version of Middle-earth that has characters that are named after Tolkien characters, but this is not what Tolkien wrote. So this is just a fun fan fiction, if you want to call it that. I just call it just a story. Tolkien was essentially just writing stories, and he kept changing his mind too on stuff. So I just kind of take it as a fun story set in a world that is very well built up by Tolkien in his writings, and if you want to go and read that, that's awesome. But if not, you can enjoy this with or without them. And I think that's helpful, because if you just write a story that only people who've read the Silmarillion can enjoy, that's not enough people. Like, you're not going to get the kind of production value offered there because there's just not enough viewers. Like, I would watch it because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan in general, but I just don't think you would have the draw of the general masses if it was so, deep into the lore that you almost had to go and read the books to know what's going on.
Yeah, it wouldn't be very accessible.
No, it wouldn't. And so it's a tough balance to make. I honestly don't know the best way to do this. I know a bunch of fandoms are struggling right now. You've got Star Wars fans that are freaking out about their stuff. The Harry Potter fans don't like their Harry Potter stuff that's come out. And now we got Lord of the Rings fans that are frustrated with this show. And I know people want everything to be the way it was during the first iteration of whatever project it is. But the problem is, it can't be like that. They can't just remake the same stuff over and over again. So they're going to have to take some chances and make some new stories. And I think they've done a decent job at creating a compelling story here. There are problems with it, which I will get to, but for the most part, I think they have captured a lot of the fun that I felt watching Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. I think they've captured some fun elements there, some good characters here. There's definitely problems, but for the most part, I do think it's enjoyable. But I will say, casual fans that I've been talking to do prefer the for whatever reason, they do prefer the Game of Thrones right now to this. I don't quite know why, to be honest. I don't, and I'm invested in both. In fact, I'm a more avid book reader of Game of Thrones than I am of Tolkien. Like I have read the Game of Thrones books multiple times over the last 10 years when I first got into them. And so I now know like nitty-gritty details of the Game of Thrones world in the book form that I don't know about Lord of the Rings. And yet I still prefer this show. I think this show is better. But I will say that there's something holding people back, and I'm not quite sure what it is. And I do think it has to do with the plot just being maybe a little too broad fantasy, if that makes sense. Which I think you and I love. You and I think, are really okay with just kind of a fun fantasy story that evokes those feelings. But for a lot of people, they need more than that. They need something that really draws them in to a character, and I don't think we have a character yet that has that draw power.